Alright, so we're holding by Kuf Ein Gimel, the union of the scholar of the Bia Benegir to Oyer and Shefa. וביר העניין צריך להבין ההפרש בין אור לשפע. מה שבספר הקבלה נאמר לושן אור, ובלושן החוקרים נאמר לושן shefa. So the union of Sifrei Kabbalah is the Kavanah of the great Mekubalim, particularly from the time of the Arizal and further, and even some of them maybe prior to the Arizal. They described, or they call, the divine influence and the divine emanation which led to the whole union of the creation. They call it Oyer, and it's just different madrigas in the union ha'oyer. We find that it's Oyer ha'mamali, Oyer ha'seivi, the kol ha'madrigas benegir to the Amshocha and the revelation of Elikus are nikoim b'shem Oyer. Achikrim means the great, what you might call inquirers, or not necessarily b'derech ha'makubal, b'derech ha'kabbalah, b'derech ha'seichel, b'derech what you might call inquiry and analysis of inyanim, in order to work out how we can, mitzad the nivroim, how we can work out different principles b'negir to Elikus. And they call the divine emanations and the divine influence, milmayla lamata, they call that shefa. That's b'derech klal the lashon that they use. So we need to understand what is the difference between the word oyer, which means light. I mean, the simple purish of oyer means light, which means that it's a ha'ora, a luminescence which goes off from a source of light. But the source of light is called a ma'or, as we've seen already, and therefore the shemesh is called in the Torah, the shemesh and the areach are called shnei me'oiris ha'gedolim, and then we saw that there was a moya ha'god and the moya ha'kotan, but it was after the miut ha'yareach, but it was an Indian from the shemesh and Indian ha'yareach. They're called me'oiris. The union from shefa, or that's a union from influence. The simple touch of the word shefa in English is influence, but that's a deliberate giving of something in a way that it's a tangible almost matter which comes from the giver to the receiver. Mashenken, it's moving when you talk about oyer, even though oyer has certain effects on the makablim, just like it does from the shemesh. It's not try to say that the shemesh gives the light, or it actually somewhere or another detracts from its own self and gives forth the ayinim. But that's the implication of the word shefa, as we're going to see, is that it's like the self giving a certain aspect, or almost a certain tangible entity from itself to the receiver. The ilu oyer doesn't affect that way, even if we'll say that oyer has an effect on the makablim, but it's b'derech mamela. It's not that the oyer busies itself to have that effect, or that the ma'or is busy to give forth the oyer, and therefore it's not busy for sure to give forth the effect which comes from the oyer. Ma'ashekin, shefa comes from the union of what we might call preoccupation or busyness on the part of the mashpia. Tehine shefa hu mahus dova ma anishpa v'nimsha. Shefa is a entity. It's a mahus, in other words, a describable and identifiable entity, which is a dova ma. It's a defined and specific entity in its own right. Mashanimsha nishpa v'nimsha. What it goes out from the mashpia, from the source of the shefa, and it's derived from that source into the makabel. Ukemoi, for example, shifas mayim. Like we saw the lashon occurs in certain places, shifas mayim, the passage of water from one place to another, is called the influence of water, or they call it the passage of water itself. Shifas Mayim, V'chein, in reference to what the sea or the oceans in general give forth to Bnei Odom. They give forth to the land around them. Well, that's called in the pasuk in reference to the brachas of Yaakov Avinu, Shefa. Well, actually, that's the brachas at the end of the Torah. Those are the brachas of Moshe Rabbeinu. Shefa Yomim. It's written by Zvulun, that he lived at the edge of the sea, and it's written in the Lashon Shefa Yomim Yenoku, that they literally benefited, or they nurtured from the ashpah, from the influence and the benefit of the seas. Shefa Yamim. What that means, that something came out of the sea and benefited the receiver. In other words, that the sea gives forth entities which the dry land entities, for example humans, that they benefit and take from that a tangible and understandable, identifiable entity which comes to them. And the same implication of the word Shifas Mayim, even though that can be called about any, that can be used for any passage of water from one place to the other. But the Nakuda Sainin in that is that the same water that was in one place is nimshah to the other. Even if we don't talk about going downhill, if the water is somehow or another moved by its own motivation or by somebody else, the water is moved from one place to the other, then that's called Shifas Mayim. And that's the same water that was B'mokim Zeh now finds itself in another place. So therefore we see that the inyan in these two dugmois, what he brings, that the Shifas Mayim, that implies that Amamoshes, how they call it, a identified Mamish Tikazach, goes from one place to the other. And Shefa Yomim implies that it's absorbed by the Makabel and becomes part of him. It's a benefit to the Makabel. But that's what we saw, the Mila of Zavulun, that he was close to the sea, and therefore he had the benefit and the Mila, that he was able to take all the things that the sea can give. But that indicates that the Inyan of Shefa, not only the movement, but even Mamoshi of the entity, but it's being received and absorbed by the Makabel also in a real way. And that's the Pshat Shefa Yamim. The Mayim Nimshochim Mimokim Lamokim, Harei Mahus Hamayim Nimshochim Venigorim Mimokim Lamokim. That if we take the close idea of water moving from one place to the other, then the water which is Nimshach, then the Mahus Hamayim, the very same entity and essence of that water in all its identifiable aspects, there was B'mokim Echad, Nimshach V'nigra, it becomes dragged or geschlept, as they say in Yiddish. Mimokim mokim from one place to the other, meaning that the original water doesn't remain, any of it, left in the early place, but it all moves in its exact mahus how it was prior to that to the other place. And that's the Inyan of the same water is Nimshach V'nigra Mimokim Lamakim. And that's more in the Etzeminian of the Tais Shifas Mayim. But we saw that the Inyan from Shefa Yomim has got another Nakuda to it. Well, that'll come out in the beer as we go along a bit further. That the Inyan is not only that it moves from one place to the other, but it has an effect and it's absorbed by the Makabel. Okay, my Cain. So that's our Inyan Gashmi. And therefore the Gemara says in Masechta Tain is a famous Lashon that Mayim Yerdim Mimokim Gavoyer Lamokim Nomo. That water goes from a high place to a lower place, meaning the same water that was in the high place goes to the low place. And the Alter Rebbe brings that in Tanya, Perek Daled, in reference to the Inyan from Torah. But that's also an interesting Nakuda. And also the Gemara brings over there that Dafki, those who are bottled, the people, how they call it, Anovim and self-effaced people, bottled, they can mention, then the water's able to, the Torah is able to go from the high place into the low place. But if you hold that you're a high place, then the water, the water of the Torah doesn't quite know what to do, and then maybe it runs off you and goes to another place apart from you. However, that's already a musadika, it's already a moral aspect of that Gemara. However, the same basic principle that Mayim Yodim Mimochim Gevoya Lamochim Noma. Okay, says the Rebbe, Bekoiches Haruchniim. Similar it is in the koiches, what the Eibishter gave into the Odom in a form of koiches ruchniim. Now, when we use the expression koiches ruchniim, we've got to be careful how we define it, because in Tanya, when he talks about the koiches ruchniim, the Alter Rebbe, he calls what he calls the Eser koiches, then he means the 10 highly spiritual koiches, Chochmah, Bina, Da'at, and the Sheva Midas. That's what he calls over there, koiches. Over here, when he uses the word koiches ruchniim, he's even talking about lower inyonim, what they go into what's called levushim even, but they're also chayes of the nefesh, just as the chayes of the nefesh on a low level, and therefore they're also called koiches ruchniim. And that's the inyan of machshava, dibur, and then you have ma'aser. What ma'aser is like a koich, the lowest or least edel and least elevated and least developed of the koiches ruchniim, but it's also a koich ruchni. In other words, the ability to move and to move yourself and to move other entities in a significant way. Well, that's a koich ruchni. In other words, that's a koich nimshach from the nefesh into the eva which caused that particular movement. And therefore it's called a koiches ruchniim, even though bi'ika, the Ika resultant, and the Ika uftu, or what you might call toitzoa, of that particular, the resultant of that particular koich is a doragashmi. But the koich is be'etzem a koich ruchni. Well, that comes out of klal, just by the way. So you do in Tzeres that be'ika, the mensch is a ruchni. The Ika of the mensch is the nefesh. The guf is only a kli to all the different inyonim of the nefesh. And mamela emes, the nefesh wouldn't be able to carry out certain inyonim kumavoy and tani perek lamantayin lamvov. That if it wasn't for the evarim, then the nefesh wouldn't be able to carry out certain inyonim. But what actually causes that carrying out is the nefesh, not the guf mitzadatme is a doime. So man, he's made levitic by the nefesh, and the decisions and the actual carryings out of all the different inyonim are really alidei nefesh, and therefore even the simple koiches and the more poshut koiches in the mensch are also called koiches ruchniim. That's what he means here. Kemoy bekoiches haruchniim, kemoy koich hazriko al derech moshel, the power to throw things. K'shezeirak even oy tzrer beraglei. Hari nivdo v'nifrash miktas koyach v'chayes mikoyach haregel u'mislabish beguf adova hanizrach. Here we see a very interesting inyan. He's taking an inyan from Zrika, and Zrika means to throw. The word lizrik in Lashkar means to throw. And in a lot of drushim and in many places in Chassidus where we use this mashal, not only for the inyan here, but we also use it when we get to other inyanim, very delicate inyanim in Chassidus. We usually give the mashal of the hand, because when you throw, it's much easier, much more common that a person would throw with a lashon that we call zrika, is b'derech klal either with the arm or the hand, or a combination of both of them. And here the Rebbe says the inyan from koyach hazrika, he describes it davke beraglei. So maybe we suggest that the reason why he takes here the inyan because of raglei is he's trying. The Rebbe, we're out here to indicate how the lowest of all the koiches in the koiches ruchniim, which are those koiches hamasiyim, erashat tamaisa, which have come down all the way even into a inyan like the regil, or nonetheless they have something be'emes ruchnias to give forth. And when they give forth amahus inyan just like a higher eva would do. In other words, the Chiddush being that it's got nothing to do with the, what you might call the, how do you describe it, the echelons of the different koiches. There's a word I can't think of in English. The different, or the hierarchy of the different koiches. No, even the koich haki tachtoi and the koich haki achrein, which got to do with the regil, if that moves in a certain way, then it gives forth a koich pictures with the hand or the arm or the shoulder, other higher inyanim do. And the same inyan can be learned mize hayad or a regil. But Adarabah, they all have exactly the same descriptive results, notwithstanding which Ava it is. That's Yesh Lema. That's one of the reasons why he brings Dafkir from the Regel. It was something that he indicates that even though it's a Koyach HaYoisa Achrein, it's a very low and sort of what you might call a common type of Koyach Ruchni being Nimshach, but nonetheless, it has exactly the same influence as a higher koich would have. Or it's just another possibility why he mentions Dafkir Dinya from Regil, which is unusual. If you look in other drushim, you don't find it. It's in most of the other drushim where it's brought this moshel, it's brought Dafkir with the hand. Or a regel, biyode or iragli, and it usually talks in the actual description of the moshel about the regel. I'm sorry, about the hand. And here Dafkir is an emphasis on the Indian from regel. It's not again in the pshat hador, but it's an interesting Indian. Why would that be the case? So maybe we could say that just beter rochik that we find in the Gemara Beneget in the Arba Ovis Nazikin, if you learn Baba Kama, but the Gemara talks about regil. One of the Arba Ovis Nazikin is regil, and that's when a behemoth or other animals which belong to a certain balabas, that they walk and they, through the movement of their feet, they cause things to jump. Yeah, and those things jump and hit something else and cause a damage to another balabas, and that's called regil. Yeah. And Mamela, since we're talking about the movement of inyanim from one place to another by jumping or by going up into the air, is that's described in the Gemara, or it has a certain influence or significance in the Gemara under the general term regil rather than yad. Anyway, whatever. It's interesting that the Rebbe brings Dafkir from the foot. Anyway, even or Itzrer means a bunch of small stones. Baragloi, Hari Nivda v'Nifrash, Miktas Koyach v'Chayis, Mikoyach Haregel. Now that expression, Koyach v'Chayis, is also very meduyak. It's well known and brought down in other drushim. Considers one. I don't know if anybody's here. We once learned the difference between Koyach and Oyer and Koyach v'Chayis. We didn't know that in this class, and probably in our previous class. In Tamil Beis, there's a whole big arenas about that. And also, it's Mavur in Kama Drushim, even the Rebbe Nishma Seiden in Tovrei Samach, in the early part of the Hemshech of Tovrei Samach. There's also a big beer, when I get to the Indian from Koyach v'Chayis. We find Oyer v'Koyach v'Chayis. And the Alter Rebbe in Tanya, in Perek Nun Gimel, if you look, Perek, sorry, not Perek Nun Gimel, Perek Nun Aleph, the Alter brings out there the expression, Koyach, he brings out the Oyer, V'Chayas, V'Koyach, and he says it about 3 or 4 times over there. He says Oyer, and then he says Chayas, and then he says Koyach. Here the Rebbe says Koyach V'Chayas. Of Yesh L'Datik, because it's not just stone. Yesh B'Seh Inyan Masuyam, that what the Eivorim give off is called Dafkir Inyan from Koyach. And the Pnimis of that is called Chayas. Maybe we don't get too involved in that at the moment because it might take us onto a side track. Suffice it to say that when you give off a specific power from the body, what it's identifiable in not only its direction, nor in its actual, what we're going to meet the word pull in a second, in a pu'ula, in a direct, definable goal, then that's called koyach. That's called Siddhasi Inyam for koyach. And that is a giving forth of something which eventually enters into a Dova Nivdal, and that's exactly what we're going to see here. It goes into something separate, and therefore B'Pnimius or Lamaila, it's got to do with the Hashpur from the Kalim, and for that matter the whole Hashpur Kalim themselves. Anyway, so he says what happens is that they're separated off, Nivdal, Nifrash, that's literally derived out. Miktas min koyach v'chayis, mikoyach haregel, that the regel of a mensch has got in itself chayis, and it's got the ability to give forth a koyach through that chayis, and so it gives off and is separated off, mamish, a defined, that's what we said just now, that's the concept of the word koyach, a defined and reckoned out spiritual force which goes out with a direct aim and it has a direct result, and that goes out from the regel umislabish beguf hadova hanizrach, and it enters literally the guf hadova hanizrach. It has an effect on the thing which is being thrown. Yeah. Now the truth is it's not really mislabish. So that's what we'll soon see in a second. Hagam she'ena mislabish b'pnimiyusay mikol makim nikra ze mislabish mipnei shekoyach apoyo b'pchinas pa'ula v'lo b'pchinas siba. So here we made up with some very interesting inyonim. Ki kasher zeirav no maila lamata. For example, if a mensch were to throw from above downwards, oz pa'ulas hazeirach boi rak b'derech siba, shari hu neifo mi'atzmei, v'hazeirach hu rak siba sheyipoel. Al etzem and afilu hu mi'atzmei. So we see then that we're talking about pa'ula siba and about islabshus. We've got here about three different terms. Well, we've got to sort of work out what are we talking about. B'derech klau, islabshus means where one koyach elyon is mislabish, enters into koyach tachtin and uses the koyach tachtin in the form of a lavush. That's what's called mitzlabish. In other words, that the koyach elyon doesn't lose its identity mikol v'kol, but it becomes garmented and somehow or another guided and, as you might say, defined or limited by the lavush into which it enters. For example, when you put on a lavush, then that makes all sorts of things possible for you, but it limits you in some way, and in some way defines how you're going to function, and it adds to you in the form of making you express yourself in your surroundings. Like the old Klav has it, that you can't enter a surroundings if you don't have lavushim. That's the way it is. Mashkin and the Indian and lavushim make that possible, but they also, they fit on the guf and they in some way limit the body, and in a certain way they also define it or express it. Because if it's a good lavush, it makes the mensch look somewhat impressive. It has a certain effect on him. Which means that the higher koyach, by entering a lower koyach, b'derech islabshus, is defined, altered l'mayl yusa b'derech klau, not in a way that alters the very essence of the higher koyach, but there's a very profound interreaction from the lavush into the higher koyach, and that's what we call islabshus in Tzurz. Now, for example, you have the union of islabshus, midas b'aseichel. We'll see that as we go on a bit further. You can have how a seichel can enter inside a midah and cause a whole midah to alter its whole way of functioning, and the midah becomes like a sort of an ornamental way for the seichel to express itself. But the seichel wouldn't have been able to do that had it not had the midah. So that we see that the emotional traits called the midas, or they have the ability to be garments in the way of limiting, but at the same time adding a mila and an expression into the surroundings. So it's very similar to the concept of the lavush of a man. So that's also called islabshus. So here says that it's not really islabshus, because what happens is that koyach hazoyrek, which has an effect on the stone and makes it go up into the air, it doesn't enter the stone becoming defined by the stone and made special by the stone, etc., etc. It just lifts the stone out of its dormancy. In other words, normally a stone is a dover shomanucha. It just sits, and as they say in Yiddish, es cheppet sich nicht, es cheppet keinem nicht. It doesn't interfere with itself, doesn't interfere with anybody. It just sits there. For it to go up into the air, that's a shinui in the very essence of what an Evan does by definition. He doesn't go into the air. So what happens is that this koach hits him and makes him bal kocha go into there, makes him compulsorily go into the air. So it doesn't really enter the stone. You can't really say it enters the stone, but it gets around him and lifts him up. So the truth of the matter is it's a form of a makiv, but it's not called makiv, it's called hislapshus. Yeah, why? Because alidei the whole purpose and the whole main aim in us having given forth that koach is carried out. So it's like as if the stone and the inyan have got together to carry out a specific goal and a specific result. And so in that borrowed way we call it hislapshus. Oh, but the real concept of hislapshus, we see a bit later on as we go, it's a more intimate entry of the higher koach into the lower koach. So there was not really hislapshus. Ki she'eina mislavish b'pnimius. Or that koach which goes out from the nefesh into the stone doesn't really enter the pnimius of the stone. It just holds it or forces it to go out. Mikol mokim nikra ze mislavish mipnei shekoach hapoyel poyel b'pchinas pa'ula loy b'pchinas sibo. Here we meet up with a very important inyan. The Rebbe said, why is it called mislavish, even though it's not really mislavish? He said, because it's an inyan of pa'ula and not an inyan of a sibo. Now, earlier in the Hemshah, I think maybe even in the previous Maimah, at one point, we discussed the whole inyan of the word sibo, compared to the inyan of Ila v'olo, compared to the concept of siba. And that's what we find that the Avis is called sometimes Sibas HaSibois, sometimes he's called Ilas HaIlas, with all big discussion that we had in the earlier Maimah. And we pointed out that the word Sibo means cause. Now the word Ilaval do not mean cause and effect. That's a serious mistake to translate it. That was said on many occasions. Ilaval means derivative, that they call it source point and derivative. It doesn't mean cause and effect. And the reason we pointed out that a cause is literally maruchak, it's distant from the thing that it causes to happen. It doesn't really have, with the ultimate result, any real connection. It doesn't have any real entry or intimate link with it or anything of that nature at all. In other words, something can happen here, and because that happened over here, something, who knows what happened somewhere else, and that's called a cause. They don't really have any, the sibor is not malubash in the musuvav, in the effect. He's not malubash in him at all, and the resultant inyan doesn't really have anything to do with him directly or identifiably, only that you can trace back and say, oh, because that happened, that's why this happened. So there was the Rebbe, if you got Evan, then sometimes the relationship of the koach that goes out from the mensch to a Evan can be a siba, or it can be what we call a pa'ula. So therefore said the Rebbe, in this particular case, when a mensch moves the Evan b'derech zrika milmata la'mayla, that's called a piula. Mashenkin, we're going to see in a minute, if he moves it milmaila mata, he just pushes it over the edge of a cliff, or he just held it above a certain area and then he's let his hand go and it fell, then that's not called a piula. And the fact that the stone eventually reached down in the chasm somewhere and hit the ground, that's not a pu'ula on the part of a mensch. His having let it go is only called a cause, a siba. In other words, it wouldn't have fallen there had he not let it go. Or with the falling down there, it doesn't have any direct connection with his hand anymore. He was a kol kesher, and his hand doesn't affect that. Now, what affects it is what we call gravity. What's called in Siddur koach hakvedus. The infant gravity. Well, that's what causes it to fall. That's called a siba. A pu'ula is from the word poel. Now it's put in the Sifrei, even in the Sifrei Dikduk, because the word for a verb is a poel. And a poel also means a worker. Somebody who does a job for you is called a poel. And therefore the inyan of a pu'ula is where something is nimshach from the koyach of the poel into that inyan, and when the resultant is finished, then you see the koyach of that person in the resultant, or that force which brought it about. And therefore you connect the two and you say, oh, you see that? That's his koyach. If it weren't for that koyach, then that wouldn't have been kach v'kach the case. And therefore pu'ula means where something is nimshach in the form of a mamish, an identifiable giving of strength or giving of ability from the makir into a certain inyan, and it affects it in such a way that it enters in the form of islabshus into that thing, so that the resultant can't possibly be without the poyo. It's not able to be described, the whole result, if not the poyo being present there the whole time. I think where he just caught it to fall off the edge, you don't see his being there when it hits the ground. But in the inyan from Pu'ula, you see the koyah which went out from him the whole time. V'hainu, when it's going up in the air, everybody said, what's that stone doing in the air? Well, that stone doesn't go into the air, what's it doing? So everybody said, oh, you know what? Ploini's foot went into that stone, and the koyach that his foot put into it is holding it. And depending on how much energy he put in, then that's how far it goes. And once the energy he put in drops out, then in other words, when that interconnection between the two ceases because of his lack of koyach anymore, meaning what he put in at the beginning, I mean. But when I say lack of koyach, if he's a very big kicker, then he can kick it very high. If he's not such a big kicker, then he doesn't kick it very high. So you can even see what sort of a koyach that is, yeah, and you can even see what sort of a mensch that is from the way it flies through the air, because without the intimate connection of the two, it wouldn't do that. And the result, which means the actual flying, is directly connected and the whole time intimately connected with the poel, and therefore that's called a pu'ula. And therefore any pu'ula means that you've given out of yourself into something else, and it's there and it has to continuously act in the pu'ula. If for some reason it stops, ois pu'ula, no pu'ula anymore. So just to show you how real that is, it's brought down in certain Maimoret Siddhas that the Mezritcher Maggid, you know the famous story?
Which one?
Huh?
Which one?
So the famous story with the Mezritcher Maggid, that he saw once, somebody showed him a model of a ship. You know, just by the way, it's another story within the story. You know, the Rebbe Marash made a model of a ship, you know, I think it was maybe more than one. And there was one that was in the family. The Rebbeim had it until the Russians never got into Lubavitch, and then and the Rebbe fled by train, and then it got lost. My wife since pinked was a given. But there were two ships, beautiful sailing ships, mamish, unbelievably delicate models of ships that were made by the Rebbe Marash. Yeah. Al Chapanim is in. He also wrote a Megillah, the Rebbe Marash. He was a Sefer. He wrote I think more than one Megillah. That was also in the, and it could be that maybe that still exists. I don't know. But if it does, then it's in the library. The Rebbe didn't have the right to actually take it out whenever he wanted or use it, because he didn't, or he didn't feel he did, or Chais Pink was. But the Rebbe didn't actually use that Megillah. But I think it could be that one of those Megillahs that's still in the hands of Lubavitch. Anyway, whatever. So the Mezritcher Maggid, he once saw a model of a ship. Somebody showed him a model of a ship and praised it. Said, you know, it's a very beautiful model. So the Maggid looked at it. He said, yes, it is. Very, very, very sad. He said, it's a shame that the guy only had one eye. It's Rachmanis. You know, the guy only had one eye. So I said, Rebbe, how'd you know that? How did you know the guy who made it only had one eye? So he said, because in every pu'ula, in every dover, then the person's the koyach of the person's nefesh is mislavish. The more he puts into it, the more it's visible in what he does. His, what you might call his whole ruchnistic makeup. So he said he put so much effort into that ship that not just the shocher, the koyach ha'pa'ula from him, but that a lot of his nefesh went into it. And he said it so happens that he only had one eye. So I guess that's the message you make. In other words, he was able to see what sort of a person. So from them, for statement that the whole union of a pu'ula is you give out from yourself into the dover hanifal, just as a ship is made out of diamond dicke Sachen, it remains, the pool that you put into that remains, and that's how it gets one in a time lost or it gets destroyed or the koyach, the union of the two koyachs remains. However, the whole union with the flying of a stone is a different union, because that's a door which is heipach teva ha'ilam. It can only hold as long as the strength of the person that he put into it can hold. And therefore, we can also tell from that whether he's a strong person, whether he's a weaker person, whether he knows how to throw, he doesn't know how to throw, or to kick or whatever. I suppose the same with a football. I mean, after all, a football is also the same. Somebody kicks it with his foot and it flies up into the air. Heipach kveidus v'heipach menuchas ha'olam. That's the union of a pu'ula. Well, we see the difference from pu'ula to sibah. Now get that clear. It's a very important difference for you to know.
But with the example of throwing something, what is
exactly the same.
No, but when it's flying up, it would be a pu'ula, and when it's going down, it would be already a...
Yeah, when it's going down, that's really nothing. That's just that everything is stopped, the pu'ula is stopped, then the kveidus ha'olam just takes over. In other words, once it stops, the power of the Zayrek, and it falls, that's not really anything. That's only the power of gravity.
Not even a cause or anything? You don't even call it a cause or anything?
No. That's not even a sibah. I mean, that's just a fact. So when the power of the pu'ula ceases, so then gravity just takes hold of it. In the case of a sibah, he at least did something which brought it to that fall. There, he didn't do anything. I mean, I suppose you could say if it hadn't put it in the air, it wouldn't have fallen, but that's irrelevant really to the whole thing. Edifar says the Rebbe, this is the inyan of Pula v'Siba. Yeah, poyo by b'chinas Pula, loy b'chinas Siba. Ki, now he explains, ki is a lesson of giving time. Ka'asher zeirog mil maila lamata, when he throws from below, from above downwards, os piulas hazeirek boy rapederech siba. Really, the pool of the zeirek is not really a paula, it's only a inyan from siba. Shaharei hu neifel mi'atzmei, va'azeirek hu rach siba she'ipel. Really, the stone's going to fall below him. He's just a cause that it reached a certain point where it can fall. The very falling is from its own self. Now, its own self means its relationship with gravity. Meaning its connection with gravity. There can also be a pu'ula in the milmaila lamata. For example, v'hu shemapiloi b'koyach. Mikol mokim ein ze pu'ula. He said even if he does put in a little bit of pu'ula, dahainu, he threw it. He threw it from above. He gave it a stoop together with, or a throw, together with letting it go down. So then said the Rebbe, he has interfered a little bit here, because he's made it go down, as it were, faster. I don't know if it would go any further than what it would go normally, but it probably goes a bit more with acceleration at the beginning, at least. It probably goes more powerfully. Mapile bekoya mikol mokim ein ze piyula. So the Rebbe, that's called a piyula, but it's not really the emissary in him from piyula. Because even though he made it go a little bit more swiftly at the beginning, but really what is really affecting it is the koyach of gravity. It's not really his power.
We're also talking that he throws it down like at an angle.
That
he throws it down like not straight down, but he throws it
If you threw it out like that into the air and then later it fell, then it could be it. Then it would, because then he's thrown it in a certain direction. I mean, it doesn't have to be dafki always into the heights. I mean, you can throw at a level not far from the level of the earth. I mean, you can throw a thing, how do you call it, almost horizontally. So similarly, you could throw it in a parabola like that out into the air. Yeah, then there would be part of it which would be a pu'ula. And when his pu'ula ceased and it fell, that's not even a sibba cloud. That's gorgeous. That's just the edge of gravity itself. I mean, that would be just like throwing at milmata lamaila, in all intents and purposes. When he throws it from the bottom upwards, and that is heipach teva ha'even, and that's a very opposite of the koyach ha'even, hari koyach ha'zoirach boi b'pchinas pu'ula. The power of the zoirach inside that stone is now in the form of a achieving effect, pu'ula. Shazo islabshes koyach ha'poel bi'anifal. That's what we call the islabshes of the power of a giving force inside the receiving receiver of that force. But the koyach ha'poel is in the nifal. He is a nifal. He becomes a passively affected thing. He's not just not acting. He is acting now, but he's acting under a force which came from outside himself. And that's called koyach ha'poel benifal. Remember, he's called a nifal, and the one who's doing it is called the koyach ha'poel. Now you should realize that these are very, very basic expressions. They occur in many drush chassidus, and the definition of them is not always 100% clear. And therefore you should make careful note of the way we're defining these things for you. Heipach teva, hari koyach ha'zoirach b'pchinas pu'ula. Shazo islabshes koyach ha'poel bi'anifu, shari teva even lipoel lamata. The teva of the stone is just to go downwards. Mechamas ha'koyach ha'nivdal mi'aregel. And due to this power which has come out and separated itself off from the regel, Yizreko Evan Hakbo Lamaila, it will cause the Evan to be thrown high into the upperness. Hagbo means high. It's from the word lahagvia, but it's like a sort of a noun here. It's not the verb to elevate. Hakbo Lamaila meaning going up into. It's something similar to when somebody lifts up the Sefer Torah. He describes it as getting hagba. Hagba means the elevation of something. Yeah, so he goes hagba l'mayla, va'koyach, and that power which has gone out of the regel, noisoi ba'avir, va'enoi matnichoi lipoel. Now that's the whole secret. In the case where it falls by gravity anyway, why is it only a sibba? Because what actually makes it fall is gravity. It's not him. He's not having any effect on it at all. And even when he threw it a little bit harder, so of course he's only just, as it were, being mazarish, as you might take gravity. He's helped gravity a little bit at the beginning. But really what causes the whole thing is the gravity. Mashinkin here, in the case where he throws mil matalamayla, then that koyach, or that's what elevates it, and it doesn't allow it to fall. Va'ena manichai lipoel. And Mamir come to say that every second, or that koyach that he put into it is acting neged teva ha'olam, as if it's acting neged teva ha'olam, that every moment it's achieving something. Now that's brought down in Siddur in many places when I get to the whole concept of Bria Yesh Mi'ayin. Are you aware of that? That this whole moshel of Zriko, of Milmata L'Mayla, is a form of moshel for the concept of Bria Yesh Mi'ayin. Meaning that if you make a genuine shinui, a genuine do, which is Heipach HaRogel, a Heipach HaNormali, as you might say, and it's acting then only the koyach which made that achidush, which made it a new thing, Heipach HaNormali, as long as that's in it, then it'll be there. If not, it won't be there, because it has no reason, according to the normal rules that we know, that it should be like that. The same with Yesh Mi'ayin. The Eibishter made a thing which has no connection, no reason why it should be there. As long as that thing's in it, it'll be there. but if not, it'll just automatically become Ayin Vo Efes, Cholila V'Chas. And if we're not heading for Ayin Vo Efes, we're heading for the Yeshua Amiti, we're heading for the Gila of the Yeshua Amiti, aren't we? Huh?
We hope so.
What do you mean we hope so? I hope so. Also we hope the people will get up on time and they'll daven on time and also do all sorts of good things that they should do on time. We also hope that. So anyway, what did he say? So the Rebbe says, so then the koyach adazirach is in a form of pa'ula. And that's what we call Islapsis koyach ha'pernifo. Ve'ina manikha lepoel. Sure? Doesn't allow it to fall down. V'yaf shaharegel kfar hunak bimkoimai. Here's an interesting one. The Rebbe said, even though the regel's gone back to its place, the thing is still flying through the air, and his regel's gone back to where it was before. V'af shaharegel kfar hunak bimkoimai. Ve'ein lo shayches el oisa hakoyach shenivdo v'hufrash be'oeven anoise be'avir. He said his foot has already gone back into its place, and it doesn't have any more connection with that particular koyach which separated and was derived out from it into the heaven and caused it to go up into the air. Mikol mokim be'eis hazriko ari nimshek ma'us koyach haregel be'oeven yesh anoise ba'avir. So he says, nonetheless, even though the foot now has gone back to its place, and his foot is standing normally, and now the heaven is still flying in the air. He said, nonetheless, but the moment that it did actually do the zriko, mikol mokim ba'isa zriko, at the moment that it actually kicked the stone or elevated it with his foot, nimshach mahus koyach haregel bo even, then the very essence of the koyach of his foot went into the stone, shenoi soi ba'avir l'mayla, because it carries it and elevates it l'mayla. V'lochein oise shinui v'spailas boy, meaning in the regel, that it makes a change and what you might call almost an emotional effect, spailas, not emotional, but how do you call it, a sort of a self-affectedness, a spilus boy in the regel. Shetzodik lizroik, v'lo yizroik me atzmei. He has to throw, but it won't just happen on its own. Lo yizroik me atzmei. He can't just stand where he is and say, oh yes, I'm going to throw. He has to make an effort. And that's the idea of his pilus. Obeisas rika eina yochol lahali peraglo. And be'es, that he does the actual throwing, then he can't go with his foot. He's not able to go with his foot. He has to dafki make the foot elevate the stone into the air. Masha'enken la'acha hazrika. After he's actually done that, haregel b'menucha. The Rebbe goes back into a state of rest, v'hashkeit, and even peacefulness. V'gam yochol lahali b'raglo. If he wants, he can even walk around and do what you might call the usual thing with a regel, and that is to walk out. But he might take a couple of paces back and forth. In the meantime, the stone is still flying in the air. So I saw the shaila, what's this whole inyan of stressing to be quite ba'ariches? V'hainu, let's finish off the sentence. V'gam yochel ala b'raglo, v'hainu, what does that mean to tell us? Mipnei shenitfas unislavish bozeh, lochein oise boi shinui veis pilers. And therefore it makes him a shinui and his pilers. Why? Because he's been nitfas and mislavish. Here we see a new step in the argument. It's very common in the words of the Rabbeim, that even though they look to be adding, further Roshenas of explanation in a Inyan, really they've taken me a step further. And it's obvious that this arichas of the description of the fact that the regel, after it's already thrown the thing, can be just go back to a state of peace, or it can even do its normal work to walk around. If it would have just stayed like that, if it would have just walked around or stood calmly in its place, then the Evan would not have gone into the air. So obviously that's coming to add to me a whole new concept, which is important for understanding what is the inyan of Ashpah. But it's written in that word nitfas, tfisa. And who we have to say l'chera b'ofen kotzer. Not only does the mashpia give forth something from himself, and he does it in a way that enters the mahus of that something that he gives off, nivdal v'nifrat, it goes off from him, and causes this whole amazing change in the teva ha'olam, which is that the heavens now are going into the air. He said you might think that he does that in a completely, what you might say, indifferent way. That even Hanami, benegir to the koyach of his regel, and benegir to the thing which is moving, that's like a sort of a pool and an interaction. Over there to mensch himself, there to kilo regel, from which it all comes, it gave that in a slightly indifferent way. And therefore said that is not the pshat. That a pula means that he who does it actually becomes nitfas. He becomes grasped in that in such a way that Bo'isa Hazman, he's not at all like what he usually is. And that's why he goes into an arichas that he says that after all happened and the regel's not, it went back to being like it was. But had that he just stayed that way, then the stone would have never moved. Which means that he has got to enter into a situation where he's affected by this whole inyan. There's what we call a shinui and a ispilers. Dainu, for a moment that he kicks the stone, and we'll see in other forms of mashpah which are more spiritual, it can even be for quite a length of time, the mashpia becomes nitfas, and what we call in Rosh Kodesh mutrad. He becomes preoccupied, which means that he's not the same as he was before, and he's not the same as what he's going to be after. He's a different, what you might call poel. He's a different poel because he's now busy to make something occur, and he is completely governed by that. And he cannot go and act the way he normally does. He can't even do what a regel would normally do, that he's carrying out that pula. Which means that in some way he has reacted to this concept of wanting to throw a stone. He's had to make a change in his own self, and he's, as it were, affected by the fact that he wanted that stone to move. Dainu, he can't possibly do what he normally does. At that particular moment, and however long it takes to move that stone into the air, he is busy v'mutrad in that inyan. And therefore the Rebbe goes in to say, look at him. Before he did it, he's in a state of manucha. After he did it, even, but that's even more chiddush, he just goes back to the way he was. But that would never make it move. So what made it move was that he changed himself. He went out of his normal situation, which is normally the state of a foot, even when I get to halicha. It's not halicha at all, it's another inyan altogether, which means that the dua, the poel, has become completely centered in that action, in the sense that he can't possibly be any other way. He's got to be dafka that way that will cause the stone to move. Dainu, he's got to make a kick with his foot, which is a very specific and demanding effort on his part, which he is completely bound up in. That when I say he, maybe not his highest koiches, but to a certain extent, even his seichel is a little bit affected, and other inyanim have affected him to do that. He is now, how do we call it, nitfas. He's caught in that particular inyan. Once it's been achieved, then he can go back to the way he was, and then it's not noticeable. However, b'shas ma'aser, he's a completely different being, meaning that he has reacted to that situation. That situation has caused in him what we call a ispilus. And the truth of the matter is, it's even a certain emotional ispilus, Because it's brought down and said that you don't do anything unless you have a motivation to do it, meaning that you've got some midah, albeit maybe a very simple midah in the case of kicking a stone or throwing it up with your foot into the air. It may not be something tremendously this, but there's some inyan in you which is motivating you to do that. There's some, what you might call geschmack, or some sort of inyan in the man that he likes doing that, or all of a sudden he has a feeling that he wants to do that. Something is motivating him, which means that he is not the same person that he was before, or what he is afterwards. He's a court poel. He's a court individual in a specific action, and that's what we call pu'ula. So take this cloud in your hand, and wherever there's a pu'ula means that there's a pu'el and a nifal, and that the two are interreacted and interrelated in such a way that the pu'el is nitfas in the pu'ula, and he's even to a certain extent mispoil mizeh. Yeah? And not only is he mispoil from Rishas Maisa, he can even be later mispoil. I know he can be very pleased with the ultimate results. He might even have a certain nachas ruach that it happened the way that he wanted.
So what's the difference between this and Ilav Olov?
Huh?
What's the difference between this and Ilav Olov?
Ilav Olov is, well, to a certain extent, I'm not necessarily suggesting that there is a tremendous difference, because to a certain extent, Ilav Olov is a form of pula. And we're going to see here a little bit further on in the mind, they're also going to make a delicate difference in Seichel Midas between what he calls Emersa Ilav Olov in Seichel Midas and what is not Emersa Ilav Olov. And what is not Emersa Ilav Olov is what we normally understand, Seichel Midas, and that's not a pula. That's what he says. So from that it's mashma that Ein Chanami Ilav Olov is to a certain extent, and then we see that the Ila is busy with giving forth its Olov. Definitely. And only when it functions in a certain way is the Olov going to go. Is the Olov going to go forward?
But in the Ila and Olov, do they both affect each other?
Yes, they do. Oh yeah. Maybe not in the way that they do in Malacha and things of that nature, but there's definitely an interreaction between the two. Because once the midah has come about, then that to a certain extent is a shleimus and an achievement like Gabi de Seichel. For example, in the case of ordinary Seichel and ordinary midas are not irrevocable. That's what he says later on. So it's not really a genuine, that's Mavur, it's not really emes Ila v'Olov. When there's a genuine connection between the Ila and the Olov, then the Olov is a form of perfection, like Gabi the Ila. And that's a certain ispilus, a certain, how do you call it, sense of perfection on the part of the Ila, definitely. Which means that if he hadn't given forth that in it, he wouldn't have that nachas ruach, or that satisfaction with him. There's a certain interaction between the two. A feeling of what you might call shleimus for oid dvarim ke'ela. We'll see as we go along that the emes interrelationship of two koiches b'derech Ila v'Olov is pu'ula. Yeah. But we have to be careful to differentiate in different sort of different inyanim per se.
Are we saying that the regel is the same afterwards, after the kick as before the kick, and that there's not even any energy? Yeah,
I mean, it may be. Oh yeah. Excuse me, 1 second. Can I move with this thing here? That's the tachlis of Diruvah. Somebody gave some money for these shit. This is the tachlis. This is the emes of pula. Anyway, back to our thing. What you were asking? You're saying, is there like a permanent shinui in the regel? Well, you see, that could in the etzem musig of the inim we don't have to say that. but it's not completely out of any question that there could be a roishim. For example, let's say he damaged himself with the stone, or let's say he caused a mark on his regel or something of that. So then it could be, nisha, a certain roishim. Of in the etzim concept of the union, we don't need to say that. That's not muchrak to the whole concept. The ikh is the b'shas ma'aser. The ikh is the shinah b'shas ma'aser. So therefore comes along the Rebbe, and he introduces me then to this whole idea that a poel and a pe'ula means that the poel has become involved in such a way that he's changed himself, he's altered at that moment, and therefore he's caught up. He can't possibly, and this is the old, once again, it borders on the old klal that you can't do two things at once. If you're busy be'emes with a certain union and you're what was called malubish bezeh, then you can't be busy with something else unless you're a tremendously practiced and great person. They say about the Alter Rebbe, who was it? They say that he could sort of do two things. He could sort of be busy with a certain Indian and understanding that he could even say something. I forgot exactly how it works. But people who are tremendously elevated, they can maybe achieve it. But Al Derech HaRagel, it's certainly not the Teva HaOlam. When you're malubish in something, then you can't be malubish b'mashu acher. Actually, what we're going to do with the Inyan and Oyer, that we're going to draw a huge difference between this and Oyer. Oyer shines everywhere at the same time, doesn't it? It's the famous old mashal that oil can shine on a rubbish tip at the very same moment that it shines on the king's palace. It doesn't really matter to the oil one way or the other, because it's not malubish, it's not nitfas. Over here, the mensch is caught up, and since he's caught up, then there's an effect. One way or another, he's different than what he was. As if he's different, then that means he's altered in his essence, and that's called his pilots. Well, it's a really amazing analytical inquiry into this whole concept of shefa. So there was the Rebbe, Klolos Koya Hazrika. Oh, here we come to another nekuda. Klolos Koya Hazrika, who Koya Hayoisa Achrei, who Pinus Haora Mitzum Tzemes Me'oid, Umikol Mokim Guf Umahus Haora Nimshuk Bazeh. Now, with that, the Rebbe is warning another zach. You could look at a taina. What is koach hazrika? Koach hazrika is mamish gornish. Maisa is of all the koachas of the nefesh the lowest. First we go through seichel, and then midas, and then dibur, machshava, and then dibur, and then we get to Maisa. And in Maisa gufa, just flipping the foot is a very chitonius, not very elevated, not very reckoned thing. Maybe we could say that doesn't have any real reference. It's just like a thing that can happen, but there are mamela. Doesn't in any way say that the poil is nitfas v'chuli v'chuli. And therefore said the Rebbe, emes, that's true, that the koach hazrika is a koach hayoisa achroin. It's the lowest and less, what you might call ornamental of all of the, or ruchnias of all the koachas, even though it's ruchni, as we pointed out at the beginning. Nonetheless, said the Rebbe, the inyan is that each koach on its own level. And he said, even that koach hazrika, even though compared to your ability to understand a Tosafos or something, the koach hazrika and the koach haseichon, there's a tremendous nafkamina bein zeh. However, he said that what happens is, and that's only a ha'ora mea nefesh, it's only a levush to the nefesh v'chulu. But he said that particular inyan is nimshuk b'muhusay k'moishahu. Yeah, it's the etzim koach goes out into the pe'ula. So he said, at least legabi that you're nitfas. So you're only nitfas on a very low level. It ever could be that the mention that he threw the thing with his stone, that in his seidel he might be able to be misbeinen b'mashu acher if he was a very practiced individual. Or b'sof legabi that koach, the etzim koach has gone out and been mislavish, and therefore indirectly, how do they say in Yiddish, v'yazoy nitvi, one way or the other, the mensch is involved. He becomes involved and nitfas in that inyan, because despite the fact that it's a low koach, but the very essence of that ha'ora goes out and is nimshuk bozeh. Remember, we showed up here several inyonim. We've showed up the whole idea of Siba and Pula. We've showed up the whole concept of how a Puel acts towards the Pula, that he gives off something mamoshes from himself into the Pula, and that Pula becomes, and as we'll see, that Koloid, that it's possible for that Pula to be in the Nifal, it remains with him. It remains with him until such time that it ceases. So we're going to see in Ruchnias, for example, there are certain things that you can give a person that they'll remain with him forever. Because in Ruchnias, it's not so much shayt, this whole idea of the koyach stopping after a certain point. Mashiach in Gashmis, even though it's a spiritual koyach, but it's limited by the fact that it's coming from a Gashmistic mokeh. Therefore, it can only last for a certain time. Oh, but as long as it's there, then the thing, how do you call it, the zach klappt, as they say, the thing is happening. Among that's the union of Koyach HaPoel Nifal. So now says the Rebbe, Kamoi came, where are we? Yeah, Kamoi came, Koyach HaSeichel. Similarly is now, if we go from the other end, from one end of the mensch to the other. In other words, now we've been within his foot, in the union from Regil. Now we'll go up even into the union of the Rosh and the Moyach, or that's the union from Seichel. He said there's also an inyan in Seichel of Shefa, that the mensch gives over into a second being, a inyan from Seichel, in a way that he gives out a mahus tova, and that goes into the other person, and b'shas ma'aseh he's busy with that, and he becomes nitfus b'zer, and the thing remains all in on him, but in a much higher and more delicate way, how it is what we call ashpoes haseichel. Or kamoi came bekoyach haseichel, kamoi hashpoes haseichel min haravila, Talmud, like the effect of seichel from a teacher into a Talmud. Hine agam de klolos inin hashpoes haseichel hu ha'oreleva. It's also true. There's other things in the nefesh apart from seichel. There's chai yechida and then there's etzem nefesh. So all the koyches, doesn't matter which one of them, ultimately, as the Alter Rebbe points out in a famous maimah in the beginning of the Likutei Torah, in Lo Yisash Bis Melech, in Vayikra, what he calls in Tanya, the Mahus HaNefesh is really only Ha'oraz. He calls the Eser Koyches, he calls the Mahus HaNefesh. So the Alter Rebbe points out that that's only a relative term. Because really the koyches are themselves also only a ha'ora, so they're also, even your seichel is not your very essence, it's also a ha'ora. Ukiyadua efresh bein ashpoas ha'seichel ashpoa lahoilid, yeah, bedoime. Shehi ashpoas atzmiyas, v'lochei nasa mizeh mahus seichel eitel haben. So the Rebbe said that there's one on, that there is a form of ashpoa, which is ashpoa of the etzem. Not ashpoa, but the ha'ora. And he said that's what we call hiloda. When a mensch gives birth to a son or to a child, then there's nimshu from imador atzmi. And what comes from that is another human being. So what he's done there is not only that he's given a idea to another entity, he's actually given a koyach of seichel to the other entity, which means that the whole inyan is starting all over again through his act of hoiloda, which means that the very essence of what a mensch is gone from one over to the other, and not only does it have the powers of seichel and all the eser koichos, but also the very inyan of etzem, ad etzem nefesh, which means that the hoiloda is that one mensch that planted the essence of himself into another, and then it becomes another mensch, pink to say bi'er. That's called the inyan von ashpoa lahoili. And remember, that's not a inyan al derech harogil. That's not the normal concept of ashpoa, but it's a very wondrous idea of ashpoa. But he said we're trying to bring a dogma from the ashpoa of seichel. And therefore he said ashpoa from seichel is only ha'ora. Mashenkin hoiloda is ashpoa of the very essence. The inyan of birth is ashpoa of the very essence, because it brings about bedoime. He gets a human being just like he is. Shehi ashpoa atzmiyas. That's the very giving forth of the etzem. He gives him not only just a ha'ora from his seichel, but he gives him the actual koyach ha'seichel. He actually brings about a naya mensch with seichel. Mashen ken is ashpas haseichel. When you give seichel to somebody else, hu racha orele vad she'ena mohus ve'atzmius sichloi mamish. It's not only not mohus ve'atzmius of the mensch. It's not even mohus ve'atzmius sichloi. As a one, you can't give over to somebody the way you really understand something in your own self, and with all the profundity that you understand it. It takes a long, tremendously difficult task for a mensch to give out everything that he has by himself. When he gives over to a second person, even though he may be telling him with all the profundity that he can master, it's also only ha'or levad. Well, kiyadua, ha'efresh, bein hashpos ha'seichel, I'm sorry, ha'rehu ha'or levad, she'ena mohus ba'atzmas sichloi. It's not even the mohus ba'atzmas v'seichel. Lochin dabke, kasher atalmid hu ba'al seichel bi'atzmai, oz ha'rehu mislamid alidei zeh. Avo כשאין לו seichel מעצמי, לא יהיו אלה כלל השפעות עליו. He said, since you're only giving a horror from your seichel, he said, therefore the one you're giving it to, he's got to have seichel. He's got to have the same inyan in himself. And if he doesn't have seichel, then he can be mashpiyah. Ali himself it won't help. In other words, he's got to have a basic kli in himself to be makabel what you're giving him, and that kli has to be a similar entity to what you're trying to give him. Favus, because you're not making him have seichel. In the case of Oilada, you give him the etzem power of seichel. Otherwise, he wouldn't have that seichel of paklal. If the guy doesn't have seichel, you can talk to him for hours with the most perfect ashpor and the sitkorn schnit helfer. And therefore, he uses in Yiddish. He said, it's a well-known statement of the world that you can't make a head by somebody. Either he's got a head or he doesn't. You can't put a head up on him. You can't. In other words, if he has seichel, is good. If he doesn't, you can't make him have seichel. In other words, that the whole inyan from a ha'ora, albeit it's a ha'ora from a very high koyach of seichel, it has to have a certain kli which is mi'ain, what you're giving. Ta'ainu, seichel. But if there's no seichel, then you talk into the luft. Oba, once there is seichel on the part of the mekabel, then he gets your seichel, and what you've given him is a part of your own self. It's mamish a part of your own seichel, and it goes into him, and it remains with him. We're going to see as we go along here. It remains with him. Adle Netzach afilo. It remains with him. Toich. And it's somewhat of interest that we happen to finish on this particular point, because I've been a bit sort of mavuved that I haven't been so clear in my inyanim, because I heard to my great sorrow that one of my great teachers in Australia passed away. He heard about Rav Yitzchak Grona. Yeah. So it was very movable for me to hear, I think, of that nature, because I learned a lot from him. I was very close to him at one stage. Is auch upon him, it's interesting, that's how we happened to, I didn't intend to finish on that note, but that's the way it came out, is Bamela Hashem should grant to take of miyad, must speak mikol advarim ha'ila, and take miyad, which should be zecher to the inyan of Tchias Amazing Kipshuta, Mamish, Pashtas Kipshuta.